Okay, you there?
I'm right here.
Great. Timothy Hutton, you play Russ Skokie on the just concluded American Crime on ABC. Timothy, Russ, you had to go to a lot of dark places, and to play this guy. He's got a shady past. He's got a very strained relationship with his surviving son and his ex-wife, and there's a pretty shocking conclusion to his very tragic story. I'd like to know what specifically you thought you had to do to really prepare yourself and get in the headspace of this guy.
Well, when I started out working on the show, the script was so powerful, and the introduction to the character was so powerful. The guy wakes up in the middle of the night and gets that phone call asking if he'd come to Modesto, California, to identify his son. I thought it was a really interesting starting point for a character, and then in the pilot, you learn a little bit about his past and how he abandoned his family. And, it was clear to me that this was quite a broken person and somebody who wanted to be accepted back in the family. Even during this terrible tragedy, he wanted to be useful. He wanted to have a purpose. But it seemed everywhere he turned, people just kept bringing up the past. Rightly so, because it affected their lives so deeply, so profoundly. But the writing was so strong, and I had many conversations with John Ridley. I just felt that this was somebody who just was trying, at a moment in time when it was just a bit too late.
Yeah, and there's American Crime at its heart is about a whole bunch of themes that are under that are the undercurrents of the storyline. But for Russ, for me, I think the overarching theme for him was his great sadness and regret, and that he let his loved ones down, and he's trying to atone for that sin, so to speak. Because towards the end of the show, you really feel for him. He's really trying, and yet he keeps getting knocked back. And I imagine that would be very challenging to play that, because you're trying to have the audience feel for the guy and side with him. How difficult is it to do that, to strike that balance between a guy who hasn't been very good, but yet is trying really hard to be better?
Well, I think I try to approach him as somebody who, despite what he did in the past, had some good about him. He really wanted to show up as a father. He wanted to show up as as an ordinary citizen in this terrible time, and I didn't want him to be sort of paralyzed by the past, even though at every turn he's reminded of it. And just to keep the character, just to keep him moving forward in his relationship with Felicity Huffman's character, his surviving son, new coworkers, and other people that he comes across, just to try to keep a sense of belonging and contribution, to just keep driving forward, no matter what he might hit up against.
And I read that during the filming of the show, you and Felicity didn't really interact much with each other to keep the tension between your characters as real as possible. Talk us through that process of finding your way around his relationship with Barb and his ex-wife, who had all this history behind them.
Well, first of all, when Felicity and I met, we hit it off right away. We just had a great time talking about the script, talking about our kids, talking about life, and I think we both felt that we could, because it was happening, we could just fall into a conversation and have a great time and really enjoy each other's company. So it wasn't really planned. Just on the first day of shooting, we showed up and we kind of kept to our corner, so to speak, and we approached the scene with a great deal of trust that the other person, was going to be there for the other. And Russ's his relationship with his ex-wife is very difficult. There's been no contact. There hasn't been any kind of, up until this. This is sort of a very, very unusual forced reunion, which happens. And I think that he, you know, for Barb, he's probably the last person she'd like to have around, trying to be useful. But for him, you know, and he says it in the first show. He says, "I think now we really need to be a family, despite all that's happened. We really need to come together. We have decisions to make. We have we have to show up in court. There's going to be a lot that we need to support each other on." And you know, that's something that she's not interested in doing. And then his son shows up, and he hopes that a connection can be made there. He feels like it should, because he's talked to him on the phone on Sundays for, you know, while the kid was growing up. But what he doesn't realize is that it takes more than a Sunday phone call. Of course, it's the minute to minute, moment to moment contact that you have with people, with friends, particularly family, that make up a deep relationship. So he's you know, he's been sort of in an emotional paralysis for many years, and this wakes up something in him. But like I said before, it's too little, too late. So then he tries to fix up the house that his son was murdered in. That might give him a sense of purpose, and he just tries every possible way to connect and to belong and to contribute to this terrible thing that's going on, to be supportive. And you know, when he finally realizes that there's nothing left, he does what he thinks is the right thing to do for his family.
Yeah, that's really, I think that's really hitting the heart of what he is as a character. But let's move across now to what the show was trying to achieve. You know, it grappled with themes of racism and violence, drugs, socioeconomic disadvantage. When I spoke to Felicity a couple of weeks ago, she said it perfectly when she said that the show is not just about the crime, but it's also the crime of racism and bigotry. And I'm just wondering how you feel about how the show reflected those themes, and especially the themes of racism and bigotry, because that was really running through the whole arc of the series.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the crime of disconnect, the crime of preconceived ideas of and notions, prejudices, how if something's put before us and there, you know, people were involved, we make assumptions very quickly. So the crime of that, and the crime of not accepting other people's viewpoints, and not having a sort of a full perspective of what might actually be occurring.
There's a few key scenes that I can remember from your character specifically, like when he's with his surviving son and he's trying to rekindle that relationship, and also obviously the final scene in the finale, which was really shocking and surprising. I had no idea it was going there. But I have to say, for me, my highlight for you, and I'd just like you to talk on what your highlight was, but for me it was when you were at your job, when your character was trying to, you know, get his life back together by just working, and he was interacting with that other woman, and you could see in your eyes how desperately Russ wanted to connect with a person and just tell his story, and that all kind of fell apart, which was really heartbreaking. It's such a minor issue compared to the death and destruction that was happening around him, but it really hit home for me as a viewer. I'm wondering what your favorite scene or highlight scene from the series was.
Well, the scene that you pointed out, I like that scene. You know, that somebody from the outside world who doesn't know about his particular circumstances clearly has empathy for him. You know, he just started working there, and she approaches him initially and says, "Hey, if you ever want to talk and, you know, exchange what's going on in each other's lives, let me know." And he's quite surprised at that. You know, no one has approached him in a friendly kind of manner, and he says, "Yeah, I'd like that." So there was something about later, the scene that you mentioned, when he really does have things to talk about. He realizes at the end that her empathy will only go to a certain point, because the things that he's talking about are really a little too much for somebody to handle when you don't really know the person who's saying it. It's a lot of oversharing is going on, I guess. And she just sort of excuses herself. So I quite liked how that connection kind of concluded. He makes another attempt, I think, later in the series after he's been fired in a parking lot. But I guess a scene, in the finale, there's a scene where Russ tries really for the last time, no, it's the last time, but he goes over with this. He's very excited about this idea that he and Barb and Mark's fiance can have a life in Modesto, and that they can start over, and that he can get another job somewhere, and that Barb will be happy there. And he's basically saying, let's be a family, let's stay here, and let's not let this tragedy make us revert back to our other lives, which of course is ludicrous for everybody else who might hear that plan. But for Russ, he's determined. He's got it all figured out. I mean, he even thinks that the house that he's fixed up could be the ideal homestead for this new family unit. And there was something about that scene and the way in which we approached it, and the way it was filmed, that I really felt like it just showed so much of two people's disconnect, their history, and finally, in a way, a kind of forgiveness that happens at the very end of that scene. The scene where I go over to Barb's apartment, and it ends in an embrace, and she says, "Let go." That was in the finale. There was something about that scene that I thought was, and there were a lot of scenes. There are scenes with, there was a moment earlier in the series where Russ decides that he's going to be useful by going over to his son's sort of motel room and install locks on the windows. And he, his son doesn't want anything to do with him. He wants him to get on with his life. And, Russ is taken completely by surprise, because here he feels like he's done this really amazing gesture, bought locks. His son's fiance is about to arrive, and, the town has certain issues with the Skokie family. And Russ feels like this is a really amazing gesture to do, and it's completely rejected. So, and that scene was done in just as a one-shot scene, which happened quite a bit on as the filming went on, which is very challenging when you're doing it, but also kind of inspiring, because you have to hit everything to make it.
That was one of the beauties of the show, is how when I spoke to Caitlin Gerard a few days ago, she even mentioned that we were talking about how the way the show is shot, a lot of shots are rigged for a long time, and the camera kind of moves around a bit, and you feel like you're actually eavesdropping on really personal, intimate moments, which makes you feel uncomfortable, and because the whole show does that to you. It's very well done. So thank you for reminding me. That's a really, really good point. For people who haven't seen the show, it's very effective in the way in which it portrays these characters and the struggles that they're trying to deal with. And that's why ABC really believes in this show, obviously, and we're coming up to Emmy season, so I'm kind of trying to do this shallow segue off into awards. So you are in the running for an Emmy nomination along with your co-stars, and so let's talk about awards for a bit, because obviously you will forever be known as an Oscar winner. You won the Oscar when you were very young. You were 20 years old in 1980, and I'm just wondering, I know you probably get asked about this all the time, but we would really love to hear from you about what was your most vivid memory of that really special evening.
Well, I mean, my most, the memory that I have that's strongest, I think, is how when I think Mary Tyler Moore and Jack Lemmon were presenting the award, and I think Mary Tyler Moore read the envelope, opened the envelope and read the name, and then looked at me. I think I was in the second or third row, something like that, and she looked right at me, and then said my name, and I remember getting up. I went there. I had a date, and I also brought my mom, so I was between them, and nice, quick congratulations. And then Redford was sitting sort of to my left and back a row. And I remember I reached out to shake his hand, or he had extended his hand or something. And I tripped on the edge of a seat that separated Redford and myself. And I could feel my whole body just propelling forward toward Redford. And if I didn't catch myself, I would be right there, just falling. So, I mean, when I think of that moment, I mean, I have a lot of memories from that night, but the specific moment, I remember that my left hand was able to catch the back of a seat and sort of save the handshake and nervously go up and say a few words.
That's incredible. Yeah. After all these years, that visceral moment of you perhaps maybe falling over into your director's chair, that's really amazing how those kinds of things stick with you forever.
The other thing I remember in the moment that Mary Tyler Morris read the envelope was Peter O'Toole, who was sitting right in front of me and was a very good friend of my dad's. He turned around and just, gave this look that I'll never forget. So, from that it went to the almost falling on Redford with the handshake to getting, but the Peter O'Toole turning around and offering congratulations was something I'll never forget either.
That's amazing. Getting nominated for an Oscar these days is like such a circus. The Oscar season has become just ridiculous, the campaigning, and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks. What was it like back then? Is it obviously completely different to what it is now? But do you remember was it a circus? Was there a campaign, so to speak?
Well, it's certainly different now, but I remember back then it was a very unusual year because the Academy Awards had to be moved to the following night because President Reagan had been shot. So the Academy Awards were delayed a day, and of course that was on everyone's mind. It was of great concern, and this thing happened. So, but as far as the campaigning, I remember there were a lot of interviews leading up to the awards. There were less award show too. It was New York Film Critics, LA Film Critics, I think National Board of Review. There was the Golden Globes and the Academy Awards, and now there's several others, SAG Awards and things like that. But there were, the studio had you go out and do talk shows and do interviews and things like that, and the studios would do their form of campaigning by buying ads and doing what they do. But it's certainly very, very different now.
Yeah, I can imagine. And now you're on the, I suppose, the campaign trail for American Crime. ABC really wants this show to be successful because it's really taken a gamble. It's playing the game that the cable networks have been playing for the last few years, and it's just obviously announced that it's coming back next season, and you and Felicity are signed up. We don't know what you'll be doing or playing or what the storyline will be. Have you got any idea yet?
Yes, but I've been asked not to talk about what the story is going to be or the new characters are going to be. But recently, Felicity and I learned about the new story and the new characters, and very, very excited.
Cool.
Very, very different from the first year in terms of story and character.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we're really looking forward to that, Timothy, and we really wish you all the best for the upcoming Emmy season. Good luck with that, and obviously good luck with season 2.
Thank you very much.